FEMA has been nowhere in sight.
I've only heard of a handful of people getting approved. $750 isn't going to do anything even if you do get approved.
Where is the help for Western North Carolina? We can send billions to Ukraine, and we can't help Western North Carolina.
Welcome to No Border, No Country, joined by Judge Matt O'Brien. Matt, we've got a natural disaster taking place in the southeast right now, and it's becoming linked to the illegal immigration problem we have in this country. What's going on there?
Well, FEMA has been nowhere in sight as people are experiencing all kinds of loss of power, water, complete destruction of their homes, flooding. There's been a couple of situations where there have been Venezuelan criminal gangs looting. And Ali Mayorkas, the Secretary of Homeland Security, is now complaining that FEMA doesn't have enough money. And of course, FEMA spent about $1 billion housing illegal aliens in luxury hotels in places like New York City and Philadelphia. So it's a cluster. But the one thing that is clear is that U.S. citizens are coming in absolutely last in the list of priorities for the federal government at this point in time.
So that acronym FEMA is being thrown around a lot in the media right now, but I think we need to explain it's the Federal Emergency Management Agency, correct?
Yep, that's correct. So FEMA is a coordinating agency more than anything else. And what its function is to make sure that water, meals, temporary shelter, teams of medical specialists, and so on and so forth get to the right places when a disaster strikes.
Now, drawing upon your many years of government service, this agency is primarily set up to deal with natural disasters that occur within the United States. Have you had any experience where this agency had been used for migrant support like this?
Yeah, it's become a common thing since the Obama administration to start tapping FEMA funds and FEMA personnel to house, feed, and process migrants whenever there's a surge at the border, the claim being that constitutes an emergency. But that's not the type of emergency that was anticipated and envisioned when FEMA was first set up.
So now we've got these images coming out from North Carolina. These towns around Asheville have been wiped out by this hurricane. And one by one, these residents are coming forward and being interviewed, and we're hearing about how bad it is and how little assistance they're getting. And the government responded by saying they can get a $750 check. Is this beyond an insult, or how would you assess this?
Well, I guess if you stop and think about this and compare it, here's U.S. citizens who just lost everything they own in a storm and a biblical flood. And the federal government is saying, well, here, you can fill out this application and we'll give you $750 for emergency assistance. Well, in most places, if there were hotel rooms available, which there aren't here because the hotels were all destroyed as well, $750 should give you about 3 or 4 days in a reasonably priced hotel. And these people are expected to take care of all their basic needs with that crazy amount of money. Now, on the other hand, we have a situation in New York City where immigrants are being put in a $500 a night or a number of $500 a night luxury hotels. And when they refuse to eat the food that a lot of emergency shelter type organizations were providing, the New York City government said, fine, we'll order you guys Domino's and whatever else you want. So it's shocking. We have people who are uninvited, illegally present foreign trespassers in the country who are being treated like royalty, while United States citizens who have a right to expect some assistance from their government in a complete, utter, and total disaster are being completely ignored. It's flipped the script. It's totally upside down.
Now, the other thing should be noted is that this is not a case where the FEMA officials just went down to North Carolina with a giant garbage bag full of $750 checks and just started throwing them around. This is a federal program where you have to apply for it. And I've seen news reports with a number of people, their residents there, who said they followed the steps, they applied, and they were told you're denied. So anyone who can imagine dealing with the federal government, there's probably endless red tape and bureaucracy you have to go through, and then even then you might not get that small amount of money.
It's insane. I have a fair amount of experience with this kind of stuff. I was an EMT intermediate in New York. I was on the volunteer rescue squad in the town that I lived in. And, it was New York. So we had storms, we had floods, we had snow in the winter. And I worked on a lot of major incidents involving those kind of things. And so typically what happens with FEMA is they send FEMA benefit specialists in to walk people through the process of applying for these benefits. And they're set up someplace. If the situation is bad enough, it's a tent. If it's a better situation, they go into a building that hasn't been damaged by the storm. And you go through the normal paperwork kind of process that you go through with the government. It's probably not unlike filing a tax return, I think might be the best comparison. And that doesn't seem to be happening in this case. People are being told, well, fill out the applications online. And of course, there's no functioning telephones or internet access to get online. The FEMA folks that normally would go into the field and do this don't either, can't get to where these people are, or they haven't arrived yet. But yet, when hundreds of thousands, I think we're at about 10 million known illegal aliens have made their way into the United States, there's the U.S. government, hands out with a warm welcome, a hot meal, and a place to stay. And U.S. citizens are being denied having their basic needs met when everything that they lawfully struggled to get by working hard and being good citizens throughout their lives has just been destroyed.
Now, this story has become really big, not in any small way because we are deep into a presidential campaign season, but this was all the talk on the Sunday morning talk shows, and we saw these members of the media who were also acting as essentially surrogates for the Biden administration fighting with their guests, saying, no, this aid is happening. The government is doing what they're supposed to do. And but then we see this, we're going to watch this clip right now of the actual residents of these towns, and they're telling a very different story. So let's listen to this first one, and I'll get your reaction.
There's so much more that could be done, and giving us $750 if you can even apply for it is ridiculous. And I've only heard of a handful of people getting approved. $750 isn't going to do anything even if you do get approved. Not with the damage we're seeing, not with the hurting that people are going through right now.
Where is the help for Western North Carolina? We can send billions to Ukraine, and we can't help Western North Carolina. We have spent all of this money on all of these people crossing our borders that are open, and now we're telling the people of America, the U.S., that need the money, we can't give you no money. That's our money. We pay it in, we work, and we should receive some benefit from the government with our own money. It's just not right. The people of Western North Carolina that are hit hard should not be suffering like this.
Matt, listening to those people talking, this is not unlike the situation in Springfield, Ohio that we covered recently, where the politicians are saying, as far as migrants eating pets, no, that's not happening. And then you heard resident after resident after resident coming forward and saying, yes, this is happening. So there's a disconnect between the political class and the actual citizens of this country.
Well, yeah, what these folks that are in the middle of a legitimate disaster are being told is, who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes, as the politicians tell them that everything's going to be okay. And again, $750 was referenced there a couple of times. I mean, if you stop and think about that, especially considering the price of groceries under the Biden administration, if you've got a big extended family of, say, like 15, 20, 25 people, you're going to spend $750 on groceries for a Thanksgiving meal. So that's... I mean, it's important that people get everything that they can, but $750 is a paltry amount to be giving people who have just lost their home, their vehicle, probably are not going to be able to get to work if their jobs are even open. A lot of these businesses have been shut down, so they're not going to be paying people. This is a crazy situation, and yet this administration has shown over and over and over again that it cares more about foreigners who broke the law to enter the United States and have utterly bogus asylum claims than it does about the citizens that put it in office.
Now, one of the most egregious gaslighters on this issue has been Jean-Pierre, the Biden administration's press secretary. She got caught in a little bit of a bind here because some of her past statements caught up with her. Let's take a look at what she said recently about questions whether FEMA has been using funds meant for natural disasters on the self-created migrant crisis.
I mean, it's just categorically false. It is not true. It is a false statement. And look, the fact of the matter is, I think Washington Post fact checker did a piece, and the headline recently, just moments ago, not too long ago, and the headline was, "No, Biden did not take FEMA relief money to use on migrants, but Trump did." I'll leave it there.
So, Matt, not only is this administration as innocent as the driven snow, but their predecessor was to blame for it.
Well, first of all, they publicly said that they were going to take money from FEMA at the beginning of this. When they were receiving criticism from the pro-illegal alien groups, they said, well, we're going to take some of FEMA's budget and we're going to deal with this. And they brought in FEMA to try and house and feed some of the migrants that were massed along the border. So I'm shocked that Jean-Pierre's nose doesn't grow like Pinocchio's every time that she speaks, because the woman lies like a rug. It's unbelievable. You know how you tell she's lying? Because her lips are moving.
Who else did you say that about? Oh, Mayorkas,
Ali
of course.
Mayorkas.
That's right.
They're probably best buds. But, this is absurd. They're trying to cover up something that we know is true. And when she says the Washington Post fact-checked it and came up with a different answer, though, if you said 2 + 2 is 4, the Washington Post would fact-check that and say, no, it's either 3 or 5.
Yes, I wanted to get to that because, as an aside, I don't trust the Washington Post fact-checker any more than I can throw them. This whole cottage industry of fact-checkers has been exposed as this thinly veiled fig leaf for these politicians who tend to be on the anti-borders left to cover for them. They will use minutiae to cover themselves. They'll say some critic of the current border policy said, we're wasting $500 million on such and such. They'd say, well, that's false. They're only spending $497 million. Little details like that don't disprove the overall point.
Yeah, it's really beyond belief. And as to her claim that, President Trump took money from FEMA and moved it, yeah, he probably did. He publicly stated when he had caravans arriving at the U.S. that appear to have been engineered to try and make him look bad for his effective handling of migration in the border, he flat out said, I'm going to look to FEMA to do things like make sandwiches, change diapers, and worry about people's housing, because Border Patrol agents are trained in how to protect the border. And so I want to put the law enforcement personnel enforcing the immigration laws, and I'm going to let the specialists from places like HHS and FEMA to, take care of the things that involve the, for lack of a better term, care and feeding of unaccompanied alien children, of aliens who weren't going to be able to be processed effectively in a short amount of time.
Even if we're going to accept her premise, isn't there a distinction between the previous administration using some FEMA funds to ward off the caravans coming through and the lack of border security, and setting these people up in luxury hotels in Manhattan? There's a difference there, isn't there?
Yeah, there's a massive difference. I mean, like I said, to the extent that Trump relied on FEMA, it was so that law enforcement officers could do their job and they could get back to patrolling the border and apprehending people who were not supposed to cross it illegally. And the CBP immigration inspectors could go back to moving people who were seeking to lawfully cross the border along. And, that's an important thing. You don't want people breaking the law to come over the border, but you also don't want your efforts to focus on the people breaking the law to inhibit things like legitimate trade coming over the border from Mexico, because that helps feed the U.S. economy. So there's a balancing act, but the balancing act doesn't consist of, we're going to let all the illegal people, in, and we're going to impede all of the legal people. That's putting everything backwards. What you need to do is exactly what Trump did and make sure that the armed, trained police personnel can go out and police the border.
Now, we heard Corinne Jean-Pierre talk about how this is ridiculous and this has been fact-checked. Let's go in the time machine 3 years ago and see what she was saying on this same topic.
FEMA regional administrators have been meeting with city officials on site to coordinate available federal support from FEMA and other federal agencies. Funding is also available through FEMA's emergency food and shelter program to eligible local governments and non-for-profit organizations upon request to support humanitarian relief for migrants. We'll continue to do what we can as a federal government to support these cities as we rebuild our asylum processing system after it was gutted by the Trump administration.
So I guess the fact checker at the Washington Post must have missed that video.
I think the fact checker at the Washington Post ignored that video. This is absurd. I'm amazed that Cringe doesn't burst into flames when she opens her mouth to tell whoppers like that. I mean, it's just absolutely shocking. And, the sad part of this is the border has been handled so badly for so long that it's been very common for presidents to call upon FEMA for assistance, particularly when large groups of people need to be fed and housed along the border so that the authorities can process them. And, we had a huge gulf. I think Eisenhower was probably the last president before Donald Trump that effectively handled border policy and that saw it as a national security and a crime issue that it is. And then we had a huge gap, and until President Trump took office and started taking the border seriously again, in between Eisenhower and President Trump, we had, up, down, all around, but basically the border not being handled very well at all, which is why we have the problems that we have today with immigration.
It seems like this whole administration, their treatment of immigration has been like one big game of the emperor's new clothes. Don't believe what you think you see. This is what it really is. It took me exactly 30 seconds this morning to dig up some hard reporting on this to just utterly debunk what she's talking about. The Center Square, which is a very good source for news and real reporting, here's a headline: FEMA running out of hurricane relief money while spending hundreds of millions on migrants. And if you go into this, it says, in April of this year, FEMA announced $640 million in new funding, $300 million for direct funding to help immigrants settle in the U.S., while the other $340 million went to cities via grants for the same purpose. How can they claim no FEMA money is being directed to migrants when there it is in black and white?
It's very simple. They're lying. This is just like you said. It's a game of the emperor's new clothes, and I just thank the heavens that they've actually managed to keep Joe Biden dressed, because that could be disastrous. But as far as being truthful about how they're handling immigration, they're not. They've started a giant conveyor belt, and everybody that shows up at the border is being waved in. And it's one thing if a nation comes up with a policy like some countries like Canada and Australia that have smaller populations that say, yeah, we need to recruit and attract people. We want people with these skills, and we're going to make it easy for them to come here. But this isn't that. For some reason, the Biden administration and its cronies don't like borders because they interfere with their utopianist vision of a kumbaya singing globalist world that looks something like It's a Small World ride at the Disney parks. And so they're moving people in at a furious pace, but they're not stopping to vet any of them. And they're doing something that, if they were to actually secure an amnesty, they're going to have so many people, and we don't want an amnesty. Let's just be frank about that. But, this has been a goal of a certain segment of the political spectrum for a significant amount of time. If they actually did manage to secure it, they would have trouble administering it because 99% of the people that they waved in during this border disaster they created when Biden, from the day Biden was inaugurated forward, they have people in a limbo. They don't even know what status they're in. They haven't given them anything to prove it. Some of them were given parole. Some of them were given a notice to appear and told to show up in court. Some of them were just waved in and not given anything. I mean, it's hard to overstate how much of a complete disaster the immigration situation is. And I guess given how they handled the immigration disaster, it's not surprising that they're so incompetent at handling natural disasters.
It was said earlier that FEMA is using these grants to help the migrants. Here's another example from the Center Square. Just one city, Denver, to receive nearly $5 million in FEMA grants for migrants. The Federal Emergency Management Agency grant of over almost $5 million will cover shelter costs for new migrants coming from the Department of Human Services through the Shelter and Services Program. I think there's some people in North Carolina that would appreciate a shelter right now and are being told there's nothing available.
Most definitely, but this is not the first time that this has happened with the Biden administration managing a disaster. Was it West Palestine, Ohio? East Palestine, had a giant chemical leak as the result of a railroad derailment. And I think it was weeks before anybody from FEMA bothered to pay any attention to what was going on there at all. And, they had to evacuate virtually the whole town. They don't know how many people were exposed to the chemicals that were released. There's a question as to whether the release of the chemicals itself came from a bad call that the fire department hazmat people on the scene made. So I wish I could say that this surprised me and there was something unusual going on, but this is not the least bit shocking. It's business as usual under the Biden administration.
So we're seeing these images, Matt, of this devastation in North Carolina and these people, homes wiped out, living in squalor, wondering where their next meal is going to come from. And then you contrast that with the migrant experience in America, in Biden's America. Here's a clip. It's from a little while back, but it's very relevant in terms of what kind of treatment you get in this country right now when you come in illegally.
Yeah, and now we've uncovered a massive waste of food paid for by the public, as one would expect from a sanctuary city like New York. So how is this happening? We're talking bags of food tossed into the garbage.
This in a city where lots of people could use that food. Here's 7 on your side, investigative reporter Kristen Thorne.
This is insane. This is fresh. This is good food. This is bags and bags of food being thrown away.
Workers at the Row Hotel in Midtown say it's a nearly everyday occurrence.
We throw away food that is perfectly fine.
The 1,300-room hotel is being used exclusively as a shelter for migrants, some of whom are seeking asylum.
This is completely sad. This is a waste. We wasted a lot of food. We got homeless in New York City.
Felipe Rodriguez works in the housekeeping department at the hotel and told us about the food being thrown out.
Bagels is just going to waste.
He says this is the delivery the city makes to the hotel every day, 3 times a day for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Fruit, water, and sandwiches are also available on every floor. Rodriguez says workers have spoken with hotel management about the amount of food being thrown out.
We have complained rigorously about the waste of food.
This housekeeping attendant, who did not want to be identified, says she throws out food all the time.
Boxes of apples, boxes of bananas. They throw out the sandwiches as well.
We asked the city repeatedly how much it spends every day supplying food to migrants at the Row. They didn't get back to us with an answer, but said the food is prepared fresh in the city every day and reflects the diets of the residents at the hotel. A city spokesperson said in a statement, "We cannot and would not ever force clients to finish food they had taken, but we do donate leftover food when possible." The city says some of the food is discarded, but they didn't say how much and how much the waste is costing taxpayers.
I suspect some of those people in North Carolina who have had everything they own wiped out would appreciate one of those meals right now, Matt.
Well, you got to wonder what's going on. I mean, it's easy enough if you're making too much food to make less and send less, and then you need to throw away less. So is there some kind of backroom deal going on where somebody's getting rich off of this and they want to keep doing it? Or is this just complete rank, total, utter government incompetence? I tend to think it's probably the latter, although given some of the indictments and investigations going on in New York, it may well be the former. But either way, this is a stunning example of just how little government in general is caring about U.S. citizens, because that food is being sent to migrants in New York, but as one of the observers in the video pointed out, that's U.S. taxpayer money that is being expended in order to make that food and to bear the cost of delivering it and to bear the cost of disposing of it. And I think in the very first video we looked at, there was a woman who said, hey, we're paying for this. This is our money. We have paid into this. Why aren't we getting anything in return for our taxes here in North Carolina where there has been a disaster? And it's interesting because if New York City has the money to make that much food and deliver it to all of these hotels where the illegal aliens are staying, well, they certainly could arrange with the federal government to produce that much food, stick it in refrigerated trucks, and get it to North Carolina before it spoils so that it doesn't have to be thrown out. It can be consumed by people that not only don't have any food right now, but even if they did have food, don't have a place to prepare it because their homes and businesses have been destroyed in a storm. It's just insanity that this kind of stuff can go on in the United States today.
It just seems like almost daily now we're being shown examples of cases where this government, not only do they neglect U.S. citizens, but it's almost outright contempt. It's almost a sick enjoyment of watching U.S. citizens suffer while these foreign nationals are getting royal treatment, luxury hotels, more food than they can possibly handle. Where does it end?
Well, it doesn't, because the problem is this is based on the absurd belief that the United States is responsible for all the problems in the world everywhere, and therefore we have an obligation to let anyone who wants to come here and not to impede them in any way. And, I think that transfers over to domestic politics where it's like, well, the U.S. should suffer a little bit because life is tough in Africa. Of course, the stupidity behind that argument is if it's so terrible here, why is it that you had 20, 30 million people that over the last 4 years have made their way here and tried to get into the United States? I mean, obviously, if this is such a horrible place that's responsible for so many terrible things in the world, you would think that people wouldn't want to come here.
This was said on the Sunday morning shows as well, where when Mayorkas says the agency's running out of money, one of the hallmarks of this administration has been when they have a priority of something they want to throw money at, they find the money. They don't get caught up in bureaucratic red tape when it comes to that. If they want to, and again, no matter where you land on these issues, the point is student loan forgiveness, overseas wars, things of that nature. This government, this administration will conjure up hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars even, to direct them to these priorities. But yet here's something where it's plain as day, citizens in dire need, and they've got to fill out a bunch of forms to maybe get $750.
It's absurd. And I don't see Ali Mayorkas giving up any of his $300,000 or $400,000 salary to, improve the situation. And then on top of that, I was reading in the news this morning that one of the news organizations took a look at the budgets and found that there might be as much as $20 billion in untapped FEMA money that's hanging around in disaster management and other FEMA accounts that nobody has even attempted to look at. So my question with that is the government keeping that on the side burner so that they have additional money to spend on migrants and so they don't have to spend it on U.S. citizens? I mean, it's just absolutely shocking to see a government, an administration in this case, that is so unaccountable to the very people that elected it and put it into office.
Most of the younger generation has probably never seen the movie All the President's Men, but we remember the scene in the parking garage when Deep Throat says, "Follow the money." And in that respect, you can tell what the government and this administration prioritizes by what they throw money at. And again, the things I mentioned, the migrants, untold millions of dollars, U.S. citizens, very little. It says a lot.
Well, and here's the other astounding thing with this. So we have at least 10 million people that we know that the Biden administration waved into the country. Has anybody reached out to them and said, hey, you were in your hour of need. We gave you a place to stay in a luxury hotel and fed you. Maybe those of you who aren't regularly employed could come over here and, pretty much anyone has the skill to fill a sandbag and stack it up. But yet that didn't happen, or to remove debris. And yet that didn't happen before or after the storm. So not only do you have U.S. citizens being ignored and money being expended so that recent arrivals can stay in luxury hotels, nobody has even said to the recent arrivals, hey, you really want to be here that badly? Why don't you demonstrate your commitment to your alleged new country and help out with this? As a matter of fact, I heard and read things, looking at YouTube and looking at the news, that they were actually impeding people who were attempting to help. There was a gentleman who was a private helicopter pilot, had been in the military, and I think had been a law enforcement helicopter pilot, who flew out in a helicopter to rescue people from the storm. And he was told, well, we're about to restrict the airspace, so you got to get out of here or you're going to be arrested. I mean, this is just the kind of crazy that you expect in a movie, a comedy about bad government, like Wag the Dog or something to that effect. You don't expect to see this happen in real life. And, the horrible part of this is that there are consequences. People have died, and you have the holiday season fast approaching, and people that are out of a home, out of a place to eat, that won't have the funds to buy their children any Christmas gifts or any place to celebrate it with them, while meanwhile New York is expending federal money at a furious pace so that foreign nationals who entered the country illegally can loaf in luxury hotels. And I'm sure that Eric Adams, in his magnanimous benevolence, will decide that he's going to tap into some kind of fund to buy Christmas presents for the illegal aliens' children that they brought with them and fleece the U.S. taxpayers so that they can pay for those presents, and then have news coverage that makes him look like the second coming of Kris Kringle. So it's just... this stuff just really turns my stomach, and it upsets me to a level that I can't even begin to express.
You made an interesting point there about migrants could help with recovery efforts. What do we ask of these migrants? Do we ask anything of them? I mean, we've talked chapter and verse on this show about all the largesse we've thrown at them in, as far as hotel rooms and phones and all this stuff. What do we really ask of these migrants?
Nothing at all. We don't even ask them to obey the law, Brian. They come up and sneak across the border. We go, oh, hey, welcome. Let's put you in a luxury hotel somewhere. And not that you have to have these people work uncompensated in a coal mine for 25 years before they can become citizens. But at the very least, we should expect them to cross the border lawfully and enter the U.S. on a recognized lawful program, and then get jobs and become good, productive citizens. I mean, the first thing that I would do if I moved somewhere else, say I took up residence in France and a major disaster happened, I'd get in my car and I'd show up where it was happening and I'd say, hey, how can I help? And we're not asking people to do anything like that. We don't even ask migrants for military service anymore. In most countries, we don't even ask people who come to America to, sign up for AmeriCorps or the Peace Corps. We ask nothing and give out many, many, many things. And that's got to stop if that is depleting our budget to the point where we cannot assist Americans in a storm with even the most basic aid that should come from governments.
So again, Matt, drawing upon your government experience, this issue now has a lot of light on it for all the reasons we mentioned, that there's a lot of attention on what's happening here. What is the future of FEMA after this, in particular with respect to being used as this conduit to funnel money to migrants?
Well, FEMA is an odd organization. And, in most countries, this kind of assistance would be handled by the military. But because the Posse Comitatus Act and the general resistance of Americans to have the military doing a lot of things in the country, we have FEMA. And most FEMA employees are part-time, and it's a coordinating agency. So what happens is FEMA comes into function when there is a disaster. They call up their roster of part-time reservist people, and they put them to work. And it's had problems due to that fact because it doesn't have people just sitting around watching for disasters. It doesn't have a robust system of pre-positioning equipment and food and medicine and medical supplies all over the country. It does those things, but it does them on the spur of the moment when the disaster is about to hit or right after it hits. So I think we're probably going to be saddled with FEMA for quite some time in its current incarnation. I think the trick is to try and make the whole system work better. I mean, if we can run a National Guard at a state level, and a lot of states have a state guard, which is a state-run version of the National Guard. If those things can all be run by state and local governments, then I think FEMA should be able to have some kind of a robust plan where it can call up specialists when it needs them and respond to all these kind of disasters. The fact is, if we didn't have half of the Border Patrol, CBP, and ICE changing diapers and making sandwiches, they're people that are frequently called up because they're part of the Department of Homeland Security. They have training to deal with these kind of situations. And a lot of guys that I worked with at ICE when Hurricane Katrina happened were sent down to New Orleans to assist with law enforcement down there. But of course, we can't do that because they're all running around playing nursemaid and hotel concierge to people who have broken our laws to get into the United States.
Congratulations, you made it to the end of the podcast. If you'd like to learn more about the Immigration Reform Law Institute, go to irli.org. If you found this information useful and you'd like to support the show, go to irli.org/podcast. You can also hear this show on Apple Podcasts, Rumble, and Spotify. And don't forget to check us out on all the major social media platforms. Thanks again.